I sat in my hotel room in Seattle, staring at my phone after that strange call with Marcy. Something felt off. In 12 years of marriage, I'd never had trouble reaching Sylvie at work. She always had her phone nearby, and if she couldn't pick up, Claire would give me a clear update on her whereabouts. But today was different. I'd called the office main line since Sylvie wasn't answering her cell, and Marcy's usual cheerful greeting had faltered when I identified myself. "Oh, Mr. Traeger, Sylvie's really busy right now. In a meeting. Can't be disturbed." The hesitation in her voice rang alarm bells. Marcy was typically a fountain of information, always eager to chat. And where was Claire? She was Sylvie's shadow at the office, managing her schedule with military precision. I'd looked at the contract papers spread across the hotel desk, but couldn't focus. The negotiations I'd flown out here for suddenly seemed less important. That knot in my stomach grew tighter as I recalled other small things from the past few weeks. Sylvie working later than usual. Her phone facing down on the nightstand. The way she'd been distracted during our morning coffee ritual. I'd always prided myself on being rational, on not letting emotions cloud my judgment. It's what made me good at my job, analyzing situations objectively, finding solutions to complex problems. But right now, logic was failing me. All I had was this gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. I picked up my phone again, scrolling to Claire's direct line. If anyone would give me a straight answer, it would be her. But my finger hovered over the call button, hesitating. Was I really going to check up on my wife like some suspicious husband? The thought made me feel slightly sick. This wasn't me. This wasn't us. Sylvie and I had built our relationship on trust and open communication. Yet, here I was, letting a stammered response from a receptionist shake my foundation. I got home earlier than anyone expected, including myself. Last-minute swaps on flights are rare in my job, but they happened. Pilots clock out, weather clears up, stars align, you name it. I stepped onto my porch, still halfway in work mode, mentally sorting out what I'd need to handle the next morning. It was dark out. Still the hushed kind of early morning, where even the birds keep sleeping. The hush carried into the house. No porch light, no warm kitchen glow spilling down the hallway, nothing. Just shadows stretching long and thin across the floors. Sylvie always left a light on when I came back from trips, always. I'd walk in, see the light, feel home. Not that night. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself she just forgot, but a flick in my chest told me otherwise. Even if she'd gone to bed early, something about the place screamed empty. I reached for normalcy, called out her name as I dropped my bag by the stairs. My voice hit the walls and nothing else. The air had that unnerving stillness, the kind where you start noticing things you usually wouldn't. The faint hum of the fridge, the way my keys rattled more than usual when I hung them up. The kitchen was the first red flag I couldn't ignore. Untouched. Not a single dish on the counter, nothing in the sink. I checked the trash, the dishwasher, everything. I couldn't remember the last time Sylvie skipped making tea, or at least leaving some sign of life behind. The absence hit harder when I glanced at the driveway through the window. Her car was gone. I grabbed my phone, sinking to one of the bar stools as I pressed her contact. Straight to voicemail. Twice. Then a text. "Hey, just got home. Where are you? Everything okay?" I stared at the empty screen for a minute before setting the phone on the counter, face down, hoping the buzz would come any second. The second stretched into minutes. I started pacing, replaying every possible reason she wasn't there. Stuck at work, late meeting, maybe she ducked out to Claire's place or even Jarrett's for a drink after a rough day. Plenty of logical options. That's what I told myself anyway. But none stuck. Each circle I made around the living room peeled off another layer of calm. The clock ticked louder. When your answer can't be rational, you start imagining the irrational. The darkness of the house pressed in around me. As my phone finally rang, my heart leapt at Sylvie's name on the screen. I snatched it up, relief washing over me. Ellis! I called the hotel and found out you checked out. What's going on? Her voice hit a pitch I hadn't heard in years, the kind she used when covering for being late to dinner with my parents. Something in my gut tightened. Yeah, wrapped up early. I'm home now. Kept my tone even, measured. Just tired from the drive. Looking forward to seeing you. The pause that followed stretched like a rubber band about to snap. 1 second too long? 2 seconds. 3. Oh, I'm still at the office, actually. Her words tumbled out in a rush. Got caught up wrapping things up with a client. Jarrett's here too. You remember Jarrett Stratton, my boss? We're just finalizing some campaign details. My fingers gripped the phone harder. Every mention of Jarrett had become more frequent lately, dropping into conversations like breadcrumbs. Jarrett's brilliant strategy for the new account. Jarrett's innovative approach. Jarrett's late meetings. Right. Jarrett. The name felt bitter on my tongue. Her explanation continued, each word precise and careful, like she'd rehearsed them in front of a mirror. None of the natural stumbles or tangents that usually colored her speech. None of the background noise you'd expect from a busy office. Just her slightly breathless voice and what sounded like silence. The kitchen's emptiness mocked me as I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my wife recite her lines like an actor who hadn't quite mastered their role. I went to sleep right after, tired from the long trip. I woke up feeling like I'd barely slept at all. The bed beside me was empty. Sylvie must have left early for work again. I didn't even see her. I dragged myself through my morning routine, but the unease from yesterday wouldn't leave me alone. Around mid-morning, I picked up my phone and dialed Sylvie's office. Marcy's cheerful voice answered, but something changed when I identified myself. Mrs. Traeger isn't in right now. Her tone wavered slightly. That same evasiveness from yesterday crept into her voice, like she was picking her words too carefully. Do you know when she'll be back? I'm not sure, Mr. Traeger. Would you like me to have her call you? My stomach knotted. Marcy knew everyone's schedules inside and out. Her uncertainty felt wrong. I spent the next hour trying to focus on work emails, but my mind kept drifting. Finally, I decided to organize our home office, anything to keep my hands busy. While sorting through a drawer of old files, I found Sylvie's worn leather Rolodex from her early days at the agency. I flipped through it absently until Jarrett's name caught my eye. His home address was written in Sylvie's neat handwriting, 247 Maple Drive, Arden Heights. I stared at that address for a long moment. The rational part of my brain said to leave it alone, but something deeper, more instinctive wouldn't let go. 20 minutes later, I was driving through the tree-lined streets of Arden Heights. The houses grew larger and more impressive as I went, until I found the right number. It was a sprawling modern home with manicured gardens. I slowed down, heart pounding. There, tucked discreetly beside the garage, was Sylvie's blue Audi. I gripped the steering wheel harder, my knuckles going white. She wasn't at work, she'd lied to me. The truth I'd been trying to deny crashed over me like a wave. I parked my car a few houses down from Jarrett's place, killing the engine but keeping my hands locked on the steering wheel. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. Sylvie's silver Audi sat in Jarrett's driveway like a confession in plain sight. My phone buzzed, another client email. I switched it off. Time lost meaning as I sat there, watching that house, my mind racing through 12 years of marriage. Every late meeting, every business dinner, every weekend emergency now took on a different color. The curtains in Jarrett's living room were drawn, but movement behind them caught my eye. Two silhouettes passed by, one tall, one shorter. My stomach clenched. The shapes merged, then separated. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Hours ticked by. Darkness fell. Streetlights flickered on. Still, I sat there, a statue made of hurt and betrayal. My rational mind tried to construct alternative explanations, but each attempt crumbled under the weight of evidence. Around 9, I drove home. The house felt emptier than usual. I poured myself 2 fingers of scotch and waited. Sylvie came home just before midnight. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor as she entered. "Sorry I'm so late, honey. The Thompson account needed emergency revisions." She dropped her keys in the bowl by the door. "You wouldn't believe the day I had." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Up close, her makeup looked touched up, fresh. She smelled of unfamiliar cologne. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake, listening to her breathing beside me, feeling miles apart. The next morning, I skipped my usual routine and sat in the living room, waiting. Early sunlight crept through the windows. Sylvie came through the front door at 6:30 a.m., still wearing yesterday's red silk blouse. Her hair was slightly messed up, lipstick faded. She jumped when she saw me. "Ellis, you scared me. What are you doing up so early?" I watched her flutter around the room, dropping her purse, straightening her blouse. I had an early conference call. The Singapore office, you know how it is. And then I remembered I left some files here that I needed for today's presentation, so I thought I'd swing by and... "Where were you last night, Sylvie?" My voice came out steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. The color drained from her face. Her hands stopped fidgeting with her blouse buttons. The morning silence stretched between us like a chasm. My world crumbled as I watched Sylvie's face contort with a mix of guilt and desperation. The truth spilled from her lips, each word hitting me like a physical blow. "He helped me save the Melrose account, Ellis," she sobbed, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I owed him everything. It wasn't about us. It was about what I had to do to thank him." The room spun. Blood rushed to my head as I processed her words. She'd betrayed our marriage, our vows, our trust, and she was trying to justify it as a business transaction, a thank you gift. My stomach churned. "You gave him what belongs to me, to us," I said, my voice coming out cold and unfamiliar. "Don't dress it up like it was some noble sacrifice." Sylvie reached for my arm, but I pulled away. Her sobs echoed through the kitchen as I walked out, each step feeling heavier than the last. I couldn't bear to look at her, to hear another word of her twisted rationalization. That night, I gathered my belongings from our bedroom. The guest room became my sanctuary, a space untainted by lies and betrayal. Each morning I woke up alone, and somehow that felt better than sharing a bed with someone I no longer recognized. Days blurred together. Sylvie left notes on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry. Please talk to me. I love you." I swept them into the trash without reading past the first line. She cooked my favorite pasta, left it waiting on the counter. I ordered takeout instead. At work, I maintained my composure. Meetings, calls, negotiations. I handled everything with mechanical precision. But my colleagues noticed the change. Gone were the jokes during coffee breaks, the warm smiles in the hallway. I caught worried glances, heard whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. My responses to Sylvie became minimal, necessary only for practical matters. Bills are paid. Working late. Don't wait up. The words came out empty, stripped of any emotion. Each time she tried to start a conversation, I found a reason to leave the room. The house that once felt like home became a maze of avoiding each other. I timed my morning routine to miss her breakfast schedule. When she watched TV in the living room, I stayed in my new room with work documents. The space between us grew wider with each passing day, and I preferred it that way. The distance felt safer than confronting the pain she'd caused. My phone buzzed with another message from Mark, asking if Sylvie and I were joining the monthly dinner party this weekend. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard. These gatherings had been our tradition for years, rotating houses, catching up with our close circle of friends. Now, the thought of sitting across from Sylvie, maintaining a facade of normalcy, made my stomach turn. I left Mark's message unanswered and headed to the grocery store. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as I mechanically pushed my cart through the aisles. I used to enjoy our Sunday shopping trips together, the simple domesticity of planning meals and picking out snacks. Now, I deliberately came during work hours to avoid running into her. At the produce section, I reached for a bag of oranges, then stopped. Sylvie always insisted on picking them individually, checking each one for freshness. The memory hit harder than expected. I abandoned the cart and walked out empty-handed. Sarah cornered me after our weekly team meeting. "Ellis, is everything okay? You and Sylvie missed game night last week, and the week before?" The concern in her voice was genuine. Sarah and her husband had been our closest friends for nearly a decade. "Just busy with work," I muttered, gathering my papers. "Big project deadlines." "You know you can talk to us, right? Both of you seem different lately." I nodded stiffly and made an excuse about another meeting. The pity in her eyes followed me down the hallway. At home, the silence was deafening. Sylvia had taken to working late most evenings. Whether actually at the office or not, I didn't care to know anymore. The house felt like a museum of our former life. Photos on the walls, shared mementos, all carefully preserved but drained of meaning. When our paths did cross, we moved around each other like ghosts, practiced choreography of polite nods and mumbled greetings. The few times she tried to initiate real conversation, I shut down. Not out of spite, but self-preservation. Each attempt to explain or apologize just reopened the wound. The dinner invitations and concerned messages kept coming. Our friends weren't stupid. They sensed the shift in dynamics. But explaining meant acknowledging the betrayal out loud, making it real in a way I wasn't ready to face. So we both retreated further, letting the isolation build like walls around us. Even my usual refuges offered no escape. The gym, where Sylvie and I used to meet for lunch breaks, the coffee shop where we had our first date, the park where we walked on weekends. Every corner of our life together now felt tainted, overlaid with the shadow of what she'd done. My coldness wasn't calculated to hurt her. It was instinct, like pulling back from a hot stove. The alternative was letting myself feel the full weight of her betrayal, and I wasn't sure I'd survive that intact. I hadn't planned on running into anyone at Café Luna. The place had become my refuge these past weeks, far enough from our usual spots that I wouldn't bump into familiar faces asking about Sylvie. But there was Noelle, her curly hair tied back loosely, marking up what looked like manuscript pages at her usual corner table. She spotted me before I could retreat. The genuine warmth in her smile made my chest ache. It had been so long since I'd experienced that kind of simple, uncomplicated friendship. "Ellis, God, it's been forever." She cleared her papers to make room. "Join me?" I hesitated, coffee in hand. Part of me wanted to make an excuse and leave. But Noelle and I went way back, Before Sylvie, before all of this, maybe that's why I found myself sliding into the chair across from her. "You look like hell," she said, studying my face. That was Noelle, always cutting straight through the bullshit. "Thanks. You always knew how to make a guy feel special. Seriously, what's going on? I haven't seen you around lately." I stared into my coffee, watching the cream create abstract patterns. "Sylvie and I are going through something." Just that single syllable, but loaded with understanding. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really." The words came out sharper than intended. "That's fair." She took a sip of her tea. "You know, Mark and I almost didn't make it past our 5th year." I looked up, surprised. Noelle and Mark had always seemed rock solid. He had an affair with a colleague. 6 months of lying, sneaking around. I found out when I saw them together at a restaurant across town. My hands tightened around my cup. What did you do?" "First, I threw all his clothes on the front lawn and changed the locks." A wry smile crossed her face. "Then I spent 3 months alternating between rage and depression. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Sound familiar?" The knot in my throat made it hard to respond. "The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal itself," she continued. "It was deciding whether to try rebuilding or walk away. Both options felt impossible." "But you stayed." "Eventually, yes. Not because I stopped being angry or because he deserved it. I stayed because I realized our marriage was worth fighting for. At least worth trying to save before throwing it away." "How?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "How do you trust again after something like that?" "Slowly. Painfully. With lots of therapy and brutal honesty on both sides." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "But Ellis, that was my choice. Your situation, your marriage, that's different. Only you can decide if what you had with Sylvie is worth salvaging." I pulled my hand back, thoughts churning. The anger that had been my constant companion these past weeks still burned, but underneath it, something else stirred. Uncertainty, maybe. Or possibility. "I don't know if I can forgive her." "You don't have to know right now. Just don't let anger make the decision for you. Take it from someone who's been there. Whatever choice you make it with clear eyes." Our words followed me home that night, echoing in my head as I lay awake. 12 years of marriage. Countless moments of joy and comfort and partnership. Could all of that be erased by a single betrayal? Should it be? I still didn't have answers, but for the first time since discovering Sylvie's deception, I allowed myself to consider the question. The constant tension in our house became unbearable. Every morning, I watched Sylvie attempt her usual routine, making coffee, preparing breakfast, but her movements were mechanical, hesitant. She kept glancing my way, hoping to catch my eye. I remained focused on my phone or laptop, building a wall of digital distraction between us. One morning, I found a business card on the kitchen counter. Dr. Sarah Matthews, marriage and family therapist. Sylvie had placed it deliberately where I couldn't miss it, next to my car keys. "I've started seeing her," Sylvie said quietly from behind